The Germans loved their ships, and for good reason. Throughout the closing years of the 19th century and the opening of the 20th, German shipyards produced some of the finest vessels afloat. They were a source of great national pride. So too was Germany's shipping industry, a powerful engine driving the country's economy. However, all that changed with the outbreak of World War I on July 28, 1914. Merchant, luxury, and cargo ships were mothballed, scavenged for parts, or conscripted for wartime use. Others were sunk by enemy fire, irrespective of whether they were sailing under a military or commercial flag. The total defeat of Germany at the end of World War I in 1918 plunged the country's economy into deep depression. Currency was not worth the paper on which it was printed, and severe food shortages plagued communities from Berlin to Bavaria to the Black Forest. The nation also mourned Rowley 7 million killed, wounded, missing in action, or taken prisoner. These hardships were made all the more bitter for the vanquished by the terms dictated by the victors at the Treaty of Versailles in France, which required the belligerent nation to demilitarize, deindustrialize, and pay steep reparations. One of the industries particularly hard hit by the war and post-war agreements was shipping. During the 4-year war, Germany's shipbuilders saw orders for new ships and payments on existing work orders subordinated to the war effort. After the war, orders for new ships and shipping services remained virtually non-existent, despite the fact that Germany had lost many ships during the conflict. Those German ships that survived the war were seized by the Allies as war reparations and to replenish their own losses. The prospects for any German shipping company in 1918 were, at best, bleak. One of Germany's most successful shipping companies prior to the war was the Hamburg South America Steamship Company, popularly known as Hamburg Süd. Founded on November 4, 1871, the company served the growing market of Germans eager to travel to South America. In the pre-war years, the company provided regular monthly service to Argentina and Brazil. The company did more than simply sail to the southern hemisphere. In the decades that followed its establishment, Hamburg Süd emerged as a leader in the South American trade and transport business, with 3 ships sailing to South America. At the outbreak of the conflict in 1914, the company was operating more than 50 ships, constituting roughly 325,000 gross registered tons, GRT, and was a major force in international shipping. With the onset of the war to end all wars, however, everything changed. Hamburg Süd's fleet immediately came under attack in response to Germany's aggression in Europe. One of Hamburg Süd's finest ships, the Cap Trafalgar, was launched on March 1, 1914, and sailed on its maiden voyage just days later, on March 10th. It was an impressive vessel. At more than 600 feet in length, the 18,710 GRT behemoth was capable of 17 knots and was adorned with what was then state-of-the-art technology and amenities. But none of that mattered when hostilities commenced in July of that same year. In response to the declaration of war, the government of Kaiser Wilhelm II and Hamburg Süd armed ships such as the Cap Trafalgar. However, its armaments were light, consisting of only 2 small cannons and 6 machine guns. In an effort to further ensure its safe passage, one of the ship's funnels was removed, and it was repainted to disguise it as a British liner. It did not work. In September 1914, while steaming a few hundred miles off the Brazilian coast, the ship was caught by the British ocean liner Carmania. Like so many other merchant and passenger ships, the Carmania had been converted for war and was being used to hunt German merchant ships and smaller vessels. Far from home and badly in need of resupply, the Cap Trafalgar was heading to the island of Trindade. Portuguese for Trinity, the small archipelago of volcanic islands off the Brazilian coast, was secretly being used by Germany as an emergency supply base. At roughly 9:30 in the morning of September 14th, the Carmania spotted its foe's smoke and began pursuing the Cap Trafalgar, ultimately trapping the German ship against the island's anchorage. The Carmania was much more heavily armed, As such, the commander of the Cap Trafalgar attempted to flee to deeper waters rather than fight. Orders were given for full speed ahead, and the German liner attempted to outrun the British vessel. It nearly worked. The Carmania gave chase and closed the distance. A 90-minute battle ensued, with both ships exchanging a non-stop barrage of cannon and machine gun fire. The Carmania was the first to fire, but the shots fell short of the target. The Cap Trafalgar returned fire, and its cannons proved accurate. The German ship landed devastating hits on the British liner, blowing apart sections of the deck. Even though it was outgunned, the Cap Trafalgar initially had the upper hand in the battle. Both ships continued firing and ultimately closed the distance to within a few dozen yards. The Carmania was absorbing blow after blow from roughly 70 direct cannon hits. Even though machine gun fire pinned down the crew, they managed to fire back and scored a direct hit on the Cap Trafalgar. The shot struck the German liner below the waterline, and the large ship began taking on water. When it was apparent the ship could not be saved, the captain lowered lifeboats, and the crew abandoned ship. After listing to the port, the Cap Trafalgar sank bow first. It was the first armed passenger liner of the war to be sunk by another armed liner. The crew was lucky. The German ship Kronprinz Wilhelm was nearby and had picked up the Cap Trafalgar's distress call. After rescuing those sailors who made it into the lifeboats, the Wilhelm quickly steamed from the scene. Its commander chose not to linger, worried his ship would also be vulnerable to attack from the Carmania or other British warships that might be prowling the waters. He need not have worried. The Carmania, although still afloat, was badly damaged and in no condition for battle. It is estimated that a few dozen sailors were killed on the Cap Trafalgar, while the Carmania suffered 9 killed in the battle. The loss of the Cap Trafalgar was one of the first of many devastating setbacks of the war for both the German Navy and Hamburg Süd. Indeed, the company would lose its entire merchant and luxury fleets to military conscription or sinking. Its continuity as a leading shipping company was less the question than whether Hamburg Süd would even exist in the post-war years. With grim prospects for any recovery from the war, Hamburg Süd's directors met in 1920 to discuss the fate of the company. What emerged from the meeting was no less than audacious, if not completely unrealistic. Rather than discontinue operations or pursue a path of austerity to ensure the company's survival, the directors developed an ambitious plan to completely rebuild their line of ships. Given the weak German economy and limited market for new ship construction, Hamburg Süd soldiered on with just 3 small schooners. To supplement its meagre fleet, the company creatively chartered ships from other companies in order to continue serving its customers, making it one of the few shipping lines to continue service in those difficult years. Hamburg Süd thus managed to keep afloat as a company and gain the confidence and loyalty of merchants eager to fill the post-war gap in trade. Aggressive and well-managed, Hamburg Süd was also one of the few large companies in all of Germany to prosper in the devastated post-war order. 2.5 decades later, the company survived World War II. Afterward, Hamburg Süd again retooled and expanded its portfolio of services to include tanker shipping and refrigerated cargo shipping to go along with its liner and passenger services. In more recent times, the company acquired several other shipping lines and extended its reach to serve North America, the Mediterranean, and the South Pacific. Today, the company continues to grow as part of the Oetker Group, a major shipping firm, and still operates out of Germany. Despite competition from the Norddeutsche Lloyd Company, which operated in the North Atlantic, Hamburg Süd continued to prosper and drive Germany's post-war recovery. It even managed to launch a new steamer as early as 1920, the 5,000 Seenoja 45-ton Argentina, which crossed the ocean at 10 knots. By 1926, the company had done the unthinkable, surpassing its pre-war numbers and enjoying record profits. It was around this time that the company's directors promoted a bold plan to build one of the grandest vessels on the seas, one inspired by the most legendary ship in history, the Titanic. It would be the flagship of the Hamburg Line and the gem of German shipping. For the task of producing such a large and technologically sophisticated ship, Hamburg Süd selected the Hamburg-based shipbuilder Blohm plus Voss. Not only were the Germans some of the best shipbuilders in all the world, but Blohm plus Voss was one of the oldest and most respected builders in Germany. It was a wise decision. Founded on April 5, 1877 by Hermann Blohm and Ernst Voss, the company's main shipyard was on the island of Coeverde near Hamburg. Known for its quality ship construction and attention to detail, the company's shipbuilders had even studied the Titanic's sinking in order to engineer safer ships. For instance, when they launched the massive 34,500-ton Vaterland on April 3, 1913, 1 year after the sinking of the Titanic, they outfitted the then pride of Germany with 84 lifeboats. The Titanic had only 20. Despite the devastation of World War I, by the 1920s the company's manufacturing site on Coeverde boasted 3 massive waterfront construction berths, 2 of them capable of working on ships more than 300 feet in length. Blohm plus Voss was so successful that it employed a whopping 16,000 workers during the 1920s, and in later years managed to build some of Germany's most legendary ships, such as the Bismarck and the dreaded U-boats that inflicted such a terrible toll on Allied shipping during World War II. The company also built the ocean liner RMS Majestic, which was for a time the largest ship in the world and owned by the White Star Line, the parent company of the Titanic, and the MV Wilhelm Gustloff, a ship that would end up holding the dubious distinction of being the world's worst maritime disaster, with roughly 9,000 lives lost to a Russian torpedo in the final days of World War II. The Third Reich's official yacht, the Grill, built in 1935 and used as Hitler's personal maritime conveyance, was another one of Blohm plus Voss's ships, and the company provided ships for Germany's Strength Through Joy program. This Nazi initiative offered cruises for German workers as part of Hitler's propaganda efforts. In the 1930s, it even became the largest tourism operator in the world. Even though Blohm plus Voss survived both world wars, the same cannot be said of its image, which was tarnished by its association with the Nazis. In 1944 and 1945, the company had its own labour camp and used inmates from that camp to work at a shipyard in Hamburg Steinwerder. The camp was a subcamp of the infamous concentration camp at Neuengamme, which later figures prominently in the story of the Cap Arcona and this book. The company managed to recover from complete destruction after both the wars and from its association with the Nazis. After the war, it continued building some of the world's largest ships, yachts, and airplanes. But perhaps none of its products has been as celebrated as the Cap Arcona. B. Blohm plus Voss continues today to build warships for the German Navy and for export to navies around the world. It has also diversified beyond ship and warplane construction by entering the merchant and luxury craft markets, and is now a leading manufacturer of oil drilling equipment. Blohm plus Voss retains its preeminent status as an international shipbuilder, manufacturing some of the largest and most luxurious yachts in the world. The grand ship was christened on May 14, 1927. In a simpler time, the launch of an ocean liner was a public spectacle. Company executives, shipyard workers, prospective passengers, newspaper reporters, and curious onlookers alike came for a glimpse of a hulking ship and to daydream about the far-off, exotic ports it would soon visit. A crowd had gathered to witness the event at the Blohm plus Voss shipyards. Excitement was in the air. Germany had had little to celebrate in the past several years. Before the Cap Arcona slid down a ramp into Hamburg harbour, at the entrance to the river Elbe, a bottle of champagne wielded by Beatrix von Amsink christened the Sturdy Hull. From an elevated platform, von Amsink, daughter of the head of the Hamburg Line, spoke of the ship quite poetically, saying, "Out of the waves of the Baltic in the north of the lovely island of Rügen, there rise steep cliffs, crowned by a lighthouse, which beams its light out over the sea every night. The name of these cliffs, the only cape which graces Germany's coast, Cape Arkona, will from now on be your name. May you sail the seas to the honour of our dear German fatherland and to the joy of your company, and be a further bond between the new world and the old. As the largest and most luxurious ship travelling to South America, the Cap Arkona earned the nickname the Queen of the South Atlantic. Others referred to her as the Pearl of the Atlantic, the Flower of the Atlantic, and even the Floating Palace. That it was. It was the latest and the most advanced of the Cap line of passenger ships built by Blohm plus Voss for Hamburg Süd, which included the Cap Villano built in 1906, Cap Finisterre built in 1911, Cap Trafalgar built in 1913, and the Cap Polonio built in 1914. On October 29, 1927, construction on the Cap Arkona, which had begun on July 21, 1926, was completed. 3 consecutive days of sea trials were conducted beginning the day prior to the ship's completion. They proved successful. It was a truly remarkable ship. Ever since the christening of the ship, the final preparations were followed closely by German officials and ship enthusiasts worldwide. Indeed, anticipation mounted as Germany's answer to the Titanic prepared for its maiden voyage. On November 19th, that day finally arrived. On that bright, crisp autumn day, wealthy passengers and curious onlookers gathered on the docks of Hamburg to witness the newest ocean liner in the German fleet. With 3 massive smokestacks towering 50 feet above, 9 shining decks. The Cap Arkona sat majestically in port, awaiting its first sailing. The fresh red paint of the funnels glistened in the morning sun, contrasting with the stark black and white exterior of the ship's slender hull, creating a memorable effect for those in attendance to witness the maiden voyage. The commotion on the docks included workers carrying casks of fresh caviar to the ship's kitchen, and vintage bottles of wine for the extensive wine cellar. On board, teams of engineers in the bows of the ship, and stewards scurrying about the hallways prepared to take 1,325 affluent travellers to South America. The Cap Arkona's passengers were all treated to the finest accommodations afloat. Fully 575 of them travelled in first-class suites, 275 travelled in second-class cabins, while the remaining 475 were housed in dormitories. Those travelling among the latter group dined separately from their privileged peers and were not permitted at the musical performances. First-class travellers benefited from additional exclusive services, personal butlers, and some of the largest staterooms afloat. These spacious accommodations included sitting rooms, sofas, armchairs upholstered in silk, and restrooms with a full bath. Not surprisingly, the ship's passengers included the creme de la creme from Germany and Europe, as well as moneyed families from Buenos Aires and Rio de Janeiro. The dashing American actor Clark Gable sailed in one of the ship's first-class suites, and noted Hamburg poet Hans Leip, who wrote Lily Marlene during World War I, honeymooned on the liner. Leip even dedicated the poem Honeymoon in the Sea to the ship while on board the liner. One wealthy patron from Argentina booked 2 first-class suites for her 14 dogs, while a prominent family from Brazil paid to have cows and chickens stowed in the ship's hold so that their children would be assured fresh milk and eggs every morning. The ship's logs from South American cruises in the 1930s indicate that most of the affluent passengers came from Germany, England, Brazil, and Argentina, but the Cap Arkona attracted guests from numerous other countries as well. The passenger manifest, which listed passengers by the class cabin in which they were travelling, also show that several female guests travelled alone, and that passengers both boarded and exited the cruise from several ports of call, such as Vigo, Lisbon, Madeira, and Montevideo, not just Buenos Aires and Hamburg. Elegant multi-page programs and itineraries were given to guests, featuring photographs of the ports of call, distances to each port, fares, disembarkation information, listings of the ship's agents in each port, the names of all the ship's officers, menus and lists of the passengers travelling on the voyage by class, and section of the ship. The logbooks and itineraries for the passengers still exist and are in the archives at Hamburg Süd in Germany. Sailing from its home port of Fowey, Hamburg, the impressive new liner presented a new standard of luxury and engineering for the shipping world. A marvel of technological progress, the Cap Arcona was not only the largest ship transporting passengers to South America, but also one of the world's fastest liners. The shipbuilders had managed to fit it with the most advanced propulsion system of the time. 2 steam turbines generated an astonishing 24,000 horsepower, allowing the twin propellers to push the massive luxury liner across the Atlantic Ocean at 20 knots, a speed nearly unequalled at the time. It raced from Hamburg to Buenos Aires in a mere 15 days. The 4th largest ship in the German merchant fleet, the Cap Arcona measured roughly 676 feet in length and 189 feet from its keel to the topside flags. Its specs included a beam of nearly 85 feet with a draft of 50 feet. It displaced 27,561 tons and was crewed by 475 hand-picked sailors, chefs, concierges, and other service professionals. As a result, the luxury liner ended up costing a staggering 35 billion Reichsmarks. In short, it was a ship worthy of the adulation. Hamburg Süd selected the best officers for the new flagship. The Cap Arcona was commanded by Commodore Ernst Rollin, an experienced captain who had previously served as master of the Cap Polonio. His chief officer was Richard Nier, who was being groomed for higher command. In addition to the experienced crew, masseurs, physicians and chaplains were on hand to further serve the guests. The Cap Arcona even had its own postmark and a seaplane that brought regular mail service to the ship, regardless of its location on the planet. First-class passengers were told that their every request would be fulfilled, no matter how fantastic. The ship's top 3 decks boasted an assortment of recreational amenities, including regulation-sized tennis and shuffleboard courts, an indoor heated pool, chaise longues, spacious decks bookended by large potted palms, and a walking track stretching 1/5 of a mile along the promenade deck. Passengers enjoyed everything from leisurely games and gambling to an expansive collection of art that adorned the ship's elegantly decorated corridors and lobbies. After a day of swimming, sunning and fun, guests relaxed at the Winter Garden Club, perhaps the ship's most popular drinking establishment, and revelled in the individualised attention that came from a ratio of 2 crew members to every first-class passenger. The daily pampering also included British high tea, with an assortment of cakes and beverages, 3 elegant fireplaces, jazz music performed at the Palm Court, and performances of Mozart, Strauss and other great composers by the ship's orchestra. Because of the popularity of Argentina as a destination, and the growing number of Argentines travelling on the ship, the Cap Arcona also offered tango music and dancing. Famous Argentinian band leader and pianist Enrique Lomuto performed on board the ship, and served as its musical director. One of the highlights of sailing on the Cap Arcona was the food. The ship was known for Epicurean dinners in the Grand Salon, an elegant parlour capable of seating 436 guests at one time. For many years, executive chef Sibelius and assistant chef Nowak prepared the finest meals afloat. A transatlantic crossing in 1937 featured a multiple-course dinner menu with Chateaubriand and Bernhardt potatoes, shish kebabs garnished with herbs and spices, fresh fish, veal, grilled hens, Irish bird soup, salad, and California pears in syrup. The dessert selection included ice cream with a fruity, nutty nougat, pastries, Carmen cakes, and jelly Miss Heliot. The jelly dessert was named for an operetta in 1890. A Christmas menu from a holiday cruise in 1933 offered an array of options, including 3 soups, double broth soup, broth with caracou, and Irish bird soup, and several courses. Passengers selected from silverside fish, fried alla romana, veal with truffle sauce, hearts of palm, and royal potatoes, pork ribs, lamb chops with goose liver, celery and spiral potatoes, and grilled hens. They also enjoyed cauliflower, ham croquettes, pasta palma, a salad with yellow beans, and a cold buffet selection that included boned chicken in jelly Nancy and pickled quail with capers and onions. Before any dinner seating, guests enjoyed drinks, hors d'oeuvres, and entertainment in the Jockey Club, and afterward relaxed with fruits and coffees in either the Grand Hall, Ballroom, Smoking Room, or Winter Garden Club. Champagne and iced beluga caviar were available for every meal and occasion, and the ship celebrated the passengers' last night aboard with a grand farewell banquet in the main banquet hall. The transatlantic voyages, with their many ports of call, typically lasted 5 weeks. See, in addition to the ship's South American itineraries, the Cap Arcona also sailed to such ports of call as Casablanca, Russia, Santos and Hafen, an island off northern Germany. One voyage, departing on July 4th, 1935, from Hamburg to Buenos Aires, travelled to Boulogne-sur-Mer in northern France, Southampton, La Coruña, Vigo, Lisbon, Madeira, and then to South America, with stops in Rio de Janeiro and Montevideo, Uruguay. For example, the ship's logbooks show trips from September 3rd to October 10th, 1933, October 20th to November 24th, 1933, and April 3rd to May 12th, 1938. These cities excitedly announced each arrival and departure of the famous ship. For instance, in 1934, when the Cap Arcona visited Puerto Vigo in Galicia, Spain, one of the largest fishing ports and busiest shipping centres in the world, newspapers and public bulletins eagerly documented the occasion. Boasted one account: "It just left to Lisbon. This is the first trip of the German ship Cap Arcona." Reporters even announced the ocean liner's speed and tonnage. The Cap Arcona departed from Hamburg on its maiden voyage at the scheduled time on November 19, 1927. Amid the popping champagne corks and stringed instruments on the upper decks, passengers waved enthusiastically to the crowds below on the docks. This would be but the first of the ship's 91 transatlantic crossings, travelling from 1927 to 1939 from Germany to Buenos Aires, La Plata, Montevideo, and Rio de Janeiro. Hamburg Süd bet its future on the ship and the continued passion among Germans for the balmy weather of South America. Indeed, the Cap Arcona appeared destined for greatness. It seemed a safe bet, and for a time it was, until an urgent message arrived. The maiden voyage Wassa, roaring success, garnering for the ship instant notoriety as one of the world's premier ocean liners. The Cap Arcona soon appeared on postcards and in magazine stories throughout Europe. It was, after all, a romantic period for cruising, a time when the captains of luxury ships were household names in Germany, and such magnificent vessels were celebrated around the world. However, by the 1930s, the Cap Arcona and its sister liners also emerged in Germany as prominent symbols of a new and dangerous form of ultranationalism. One of the many admirers of these grand ships was a former corporal from World War I and radical politician named Adolf Hitler, and he had big plans for the celebrated ocean liner. German emigration and tourism to South America peaked in 1929. Although the alarming rise of National Socialism in the country and increasingly disturbing news coming out of Germany deterred some Europeans from cruising out of German ports or on German ships, a vigorous travel and trade business continued somewhat unabated during the initial years of Hitler's reign, which began in January 1933. Within Germany, the Cap Arcona's popularity grew. While other industries were increasingly brought under state control, the Führer allowed the Cap Arcona and other luxury liners to operate freely, as they had done before the Nazis swept into power. For example, because of Hitler's passion for these huge ships, their captains and owners were not required to sign off with the Nazi High Command regarding the details of their voyages, nor were they prohibited from visiting ports around the world or booking non-Germans in first-class cabins. On the contrary, Hitler held these liners up as symbols of German power. Just about the only change occurring with the operation of the Cap Arcona, when Hitler assumed power, was that the well-respected commodore of the ship, Ernst Rollin, resigned his command. Rollin had been sailing with Hamburg Süd for 43 years. On October 20th, 1933, Richard Near, the first officer who had been with the company since 1910, assumed command of Hamburg Süd's flagship. He would be promoted to Commodore in 1937. Heinrich Bertram, who would soon figure prominently in the tragic story of the Cap Arcona, was promoted to Near's second-in-command. By 1936, reports around the world began surfacing of the growing fanaticism inside Hitler's regime. News of the shocking details of the Nuremberg laws that disenfranchised Jews, combined with negative publicity generated by the ominous display of ultranationalism during the Berlin Olympics, deterred prospective passengers from around the world. Bookings on the Cap Arcona declined precipitously by year's end. The Nazi regime compounded their own problems by placing prohibitions on their citizens' ability to travel outside of Germany. Nazi ideology also began discouraging such frivolities as vacations, instead maintaining that Germans should be hard at work for the fatherland. One exception to these new Nazi policies was the leisure vacation for German workers. German industrialists were therefore encouraged to both reward productive workers and celebrate nationalism by sending their most loyal labourers on Nazi cruises. Led by Dr. Robert Ley, a Nazi politician and head of the German Labour Front, ships were rented for the purpose of accommodating workers on vacations to Norway and the Baltic, Italy, Madeira and Yugoslavia. The Nazi regime, through its Strength Through Joy initiative, subsidised these affordable vacations while subtly indoctrinating workers on the cruises. The problem for companies like Hamburg Süd was that these leisure vacations competed with the South American cruise business. Ships were diverted from their previous, vastly more profitable, routes to accommodate German labourers. Nevertheless, at the start of 1999, Hamburg Süd was, despite the competition from Nazi Party leisure vacation bookings, still operating 52 ships with a total capacity in excess of 385,000 tonnes. Impressively, 57,859 passengers had travelled aboard the Cap Arcona across the South Atlantic, helping to position the company as one of the world's leading cruise and shipping lines. However, all that was about to change. As summer approached in 1939, emotions ran high on the Cap Arcona. Commodore Richard Near had taken ill with a serious bout of typhus, business had slowed, and rumours swirled among sailors and shipping executives alike that German liners and commercial ships were being reassigned to the German Navy. However, good news arrived to temporarily lift the spirits of the Cap Arcona's crew. Commodore Near returned that summer from a leave of absence to inform his crew that the ship had been assigned a new cruise, its 92nd, and that Hamburg Süd planned to build a sister ship to the Cap Arcona. The announcement from the ship's parent company came on August 21st, a mere 10 days before the start of World War II. The ship embarked on its scheduled cruise, but that 90-second excursion would never occur. The appearance of business as usual only temporarily cloaked the reality of the coming war. Of the ship's many passengers travelling to Argentina, Uruguay and Brazil on that round-trip voyage, only 2 of them had booked their cruise all the way back to Hamburg. The rest were disembarking in France prior to the ship's return to Germany. It was clear to the captain and crew that the public no longer viewed Germany as a safe or desirable place. Sure enough, the voyage would be the Cap Arcona's last as a passenger ship. After disembarking most of the passengers, the Cap Arcona sailed from France en route to Hamburg. On the evening of August 24th, Commodore Near turned command of the massive liner over to a junior officer and retired to his cabin to sleep. But in the wee hours of the morning, the worst fears of the captain and crew were realised. As the ship was approaching Hamburg, a radio message marked urgent was delivered to the captain. Commodore Near called a meeting of his senior officers. Those present were the first and second officers, the ship's physician, head engineer and second engineer, steward, chef and purser, Tom Paymaster. The officers likely suspected the worst. In compliance with the order, Commodore Neayar removed from the ship's safe an envelope. Grimly, he informed the crew that the envelope was marked "Special Orders for the Event of War for Cargo Vessels." Over the next few days, a series of radio messages arrived. Message QWA-7 on August 25th ordered no transmission to all stations, and that all ships must deviate from scheduled routes by 30 to 100 nautical miles as security precaution. Message QWA-8 ordered all ships to camouflage their hulls and avoid sailing through the English Channel. On August 27th, message QWA-9 required them to turn to their home harbour within 4 days. The Cap Arcona raced to Hamburg. Ships were to avoid the ports of several countries, one of which was the United States, which was permitted to be entered only in cases of extreme necessity. Over the next several days, Commodore Neayar received 3 more of the urgent QBUA messages. They notified the officers of the outbreak of war with France and England, advised ships to turn to Germany by Norway and Shetland, preferably at night and without using lights, and established the protocol for going to war. Neayar announced to his men that he would pray. When the ocean liner returned to its home port, noticeably absent were the usual fanfare and cheering crowds gathered at the docks. Very few people were visible anywhere near the harbour to greet the returning ship. Nazi officials ordered the crew and 2 passengers off the ship. Commodore Neayar's protestations of, "What will happen to my ship now if we have war?" were met with stony silence. Despite his earlier hopes and prayers, his beloved ship was ordered to be placed under the command of the German Navy, the Kriegsmarine. One of the many affectionate nicknames that emerged for the Cap Arcona during the 1920s and 1930s was, ironically, the Lucky Lady. However, the ship's fate, along with the course of world history, changed on September 1st, 1939, when Hitler's army marched into Poland. In a coordinated lightning strike by land and air, tanks, artillery pieces, and warplanes stormed across the border. The Polish army, which attempted to fight German tanks with men on horseback, was crushed in a matter of days. The formal surrender came on September 27th, marking the first domino to fall in the Führer's mad game of global domination. Nearly every German vessel afloat was officially reassigned in 1939 to the Kriegsmarine as a naval accommodation ship. The Cap Arcona was placed in the service of the Nazis' Fortress Command and sent to the occupied Baltic port of Gotenhafen, site of present-day Gdynia on the northern Polish coast near Danzig. The port city had been taken by the Nazis in 1939 and was now a bustling naval base. Military operations at Gotenhafen flourished during the first few years of the war, when the base was largely spared from Allied bombing. As a result, a number of warships and other converted accommodation, or help ships, soon joined the Cap Arcona in port. Hamburg Süd was ordered to close the file on its highly profitable flagship. In 1941, control of the former luxury liner was again transferred, this time to the Nazi Coastal Control Office for the Mid-Baltic. Nearly all its officers and crew were ordered off the ship. Commodore Neayar experienced additional health problems and took another leave of absence. He briefly returned to command the rusting hulk moored on the Polish coast on February 11th, 1942, but died of his malady on April 4th. That September, an interim captain was appointed to the ship. However, he was voted off the ship exactly 1 year later by the officers of the naval base. The first officer took command of the Cap Arcona for the remainder of the month. In October 1943, a new captain finally assumed command. His name was Johannes Goetz, and he would preside over one of the most tragic periods in the ship's remaining history. The once proud ocean liner would spend most of the war, from November 29th, 1939 until January 31st, 1945, in port, docked at Gdynia Quay. Its new role, a floating barracks for naval personnel, and an ad hoc training platform for naval exercises. It was quite a demotion for the pride of Germany. Its dining rooms now functioned as a mess for sailors in uniform. Many of its luxurious furnishings were stripped from the ship, and the Queen of the South Atlantic was painted military grey. Although the name Cap Arcona remained in large white capital letters on the stern of the ship, its glory days were gone. But the monotony of serving as a floating barracks for the Kriegsmarine during the war was soon to be interrupted. The Cap Arcona had caught the attention of Hitler's propaganda minister and one of Germany's greatest movie directors. They wanted to cast the ship in the starring role of an epic Nazi propaganda film.